She dropped out. Maybe she'll make it as a waitress. That's what my sister-in-law said, loud enough for everyone at the party to hear. People laughed. My daughter didn't. She just stared down at her lap like she'd been slapped in front of a crowd. But I saw the way her fingers curled under the table. I knew what that meant. Then a black car pulled up outside. A man in a suit stepped out. And when he said, "We're here for Dr. Jordan," the entire backyard went silent. That was the moment everything changed. But if you really want to understand it, you need to know where she started. She wasn't supposed to survive the night she was born. 3 weeks early, not breathing, heart fluttering too fast. I remember gripping the bed rail, begging God for one thing. Let her cry. Let me hear her voice, just once. Minutes later, a nurse rushed in, out of breath and smiling. "She's breathing," she said, "on her own. She's a fighter." From that moment on, she always was. Jordan didn't grow up like other kids. She was quiet, observant, the kind of child who stared at light beams in dust like she was reading messages from the universe. At 5, she asked me where colors go when it's dark. At 6, she wanted to build a machine that can hear stars. She didn't talk a lot in school, but she listened. And more than that, she noticed things most people miss. She saw patterns in the carpet, faces in tree bark. Once she told her second-grade teacher that gravity didn't pull us down, it pulled us in. That teacher called me later and asked if she'd been watching too much science fiction. No, that was just Jordan. But brilliance like hers doesn't always shine in a classroom. By middle school, the labels started piling on. Daydreamer, unfocused, emotionally withdrawn. She wasn't disruptive. She was just elsewhere. Her report cards were always filled with comments like gifted but unengaged or intelligent but scattered. No one knew how to teach her. They just knew she didn't fit in their boxes. At home, she lived in her own world. Books piled by the window, papers taped across the walls, hand-drawn constellations on the ceiling above her bed. One night, she snuck outside to track a meteor shower with binoculars and a notebook. She caught pneumonia. I was furious, but she had documented the whole thing in detail, time-stamped and charted. That was my daughter. Quiet, brilliant, alone. Our family never got it, especially not Karen. Karen loved order. Karen loved achievements you could frame. Perfect attendance, trophies, college admissions. Her daughter Emily was her pride. Cheer captain, top of her class, always perfectly polished. Jordan? She was a problem. Karen didn't know how to mock gently. "Maybe she'll grow out of it," she'd whisper to relatives. "Maybe she needs less creativity and more discipline." Once at Thanksgiving, she even asked Jordan directly, "What are you planning to do with all those space scribbles? Be an alien?" Jordan didn't respond. She never did. But she remembered. The day Jordan got accepted into a top physics program, I cried in the car alone. Not because I was surprised, but because it felt like the first time the world said yes to her. She moved into the dorms with a suitcase full of notebooks and dreams no one else understood. But that dream didn't last. A year later, she called me on a Tuesday night. "Mom," she said, "I'm leaving school." My chest tightened. Why? Her voice didn't crack, but it shook. Because they don't care about questions. They only care about answers. And if I stay, I'll forget how to wonder. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream, "You made it. Don't throw it away." But I didn't, because I knew what she meant. She didn't leave because she failed. She left because the system couldn't hold what was inside her, because she was trying to ask questions professors weren't ready to explore. She felt trapped in a world that wanted her curiosity to come with citations and footnotes. So she walked away. Quietly. Karen, of course, pounced. She dropped out? Wow, she said at a family dinner. Guess not everyone's cut out for academia. Maybe she can pick up shifts somewhere, make use of all that potential. I said nothing, because what Karen didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jordan had already been working with a quiet group of researchers on a new model for gravitational symmetry. She'd caught the attention of a Harvard astrophysics mentor through an online forum. Her notes had been passed around among real scientists, people who didn't care about her degree, just her mind. And one day, a formal letter arrived. Harvard, a postdoctoral research opportunity. Jordan Lane, selected as one of the youngest contributors to their quantum cosmology team. But she didn't post about it. She didn't gloat. She asked me not to tell anyone. I want them to see the work first, not the name attached to it. So we stayed quiet, even when people whispered, even when Karen rolled her eyes, even when the graduation party invitations came in, and Jordan, despite every insult, said she'd go. I want to show up, she said. I want to look them in the eye, and I want to do it before they know. That's how we ended up at that backyard party. That's why she sat so still when Karen made that comment. She dropped out. Maybe she'll make it as a waitress. Jordan didn't flinch, but her story was about to walk through the gate in a black suit and sunglasses. And when he did, when that man said the words no one expected, "We're here for Dr. Jordan," the whole world shifted. And Karen, she didn't laugh after that. The man in the suit stood tall, scanning the crowd like he was searching for royalty. "We're here for Dr. Jordan," he repeated. Calm, clear, no hesitation. You could have heard a pin drop between the patio furniture and the punch table. Karen blinked first. "I'm sorry, Doctor who?" Jordan stood slowly, her dress brushing against the folding chair. "That's me," she said, gently. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. The man gave a small nod. "We're ready when you are." The moment stretched impossibly long. Someone dropped a plastic cup. Another whispered, "Did he say Harvard?" Jordan's fingers brushed the edge of the table, steadying herself. Then she looked directly at Karen and said, "I'm not a waitress, but I would have tipped you anyway." A ripple of stunned silence followed her as she walked toward the car. But let's rewind, because the story behind that moment didn't start in a garden. It started in the dark. After Jordan left college, there were weeks when I wondered if she'd made a mistake. She barely left her room. She stayed up until sunrise reading papers most people couldn't understand. She covered her wall in notes, formulas, diagrams, quotes about gravity and light and the structure of space. I'd peek in sometimes, worried. "Need anything?" I'd ask. She'd glance up, half present. Black coffee and no distractions. Some nights, I'd find her asleep at her desk, head buried in notebooks, hand still holding a pen. She wasn't lost. She was searching, alone, in silence, with no one cheering her on. That's the part no one sees when they talk about success. The years it looks like nothing's happening. When the world forgets you, and you keep working anyway. Her days were structured like research labs. She tracked her hours, created her own syllabi. She studied math most undergrads don't touch, read obscure journals, published thought pieces under anonymous usernames on forums I couldn't pronounce. Her ideas weren't just creative, they were dangerous. They questioned things foundational scientists had accepted for years. One night, she told me, "I think I can prove that dark energy isn't what we think it is. I just need time." I smiled like I understood. I didn't, but I knew this. Jordan wasn't lost. She was just ahead. A few months into her self-imposed exile, she received an email from someone she didn't expect. Dr. Elijah Braham, a theoretical physicist who'd spent 2 decades at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center. He'd read a post she wrote under a pseudonym. It questioned a core assumption in his published theory. His email was short. "Who are you? And why are you right?" Jordan showed it to me, but didn't say anything. She just stared at the screen. Tears welled up, but never fell. They started corresponding. First once a week, then daily. She sent him whiteboard sketches. He sent her raw data sets. She reviewed papers. He sent revisions. And finally, 6 months after that first email, he invited her to Boston. Not for a visit, for a closed-door symposium. You don't need a degree, he told her. You need a room that listens. She presented her hypothesis in a windowless room to 5 of the most accomplished minds in the field. She didn't wear heels. She didn't bring PowerPoints. Just her voice, a whiteboard marker, and a brain full of questions. When she finished, no one spoke for a full minute. Then one of the panelists leaned forward and said, "You're not a student." "No," she replied. "I'm an explorer." They offered her the fellowship the next day. But Jordan didn't post about it. She didn't share it with the family. She just walked into the kitchen one morning and said, "They want me, and I'm going." I wrapped her in a hug that felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 2 years. We celebrated alone, just the 2 of us. No toast, no cake, no announcements. But Karen, she was still on her parade. Emily had just graduated with honors. Karen planned the party 3 weeks in advance, outdoor catering, custom cupcakes, and a slideshow of baby photos. Of course we were invited. I asked Jordan if she wanted to skip it. "We don't owe them anything," I said, but she shook her head. "Actually, I want to go." "Why?" "Because the story's not over yet." The day of the party, Jordan took her time. She wore a navy blue dress, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. She tied her curls back. No makeup, just lip balm. She looked exactly like herself. When we arrived, Karen waved from across the yard. "Well, look who decided to join us," she said, loud and theatrical. Jordan smiled politely. Wouldn't miss it. Emily was surrounded by a circle of people. Her boyfriend, her friends, neighbors. The congratulations were constant. "You did it. What's next? Grad school? Agency job?" Karen made her rounds, drink in hand. She hovered near us for a while, clearly waiting for a moment to strike. And when she finally spoke, it came like venom masked as humor. She dropped out. "Maybe she'll make it as a waitress." People laughed. Not loud, but enough. Enough for Jordan to feel it. Enough for me to see the way her shoulders pulled in. The way her eyes didn't blink for a few seconds. That quiet hurt she wore like armor. But Jordan didn't reply. She just sat there, still, composed, like she knew something they didn't, because she did. The black car arrived at 3:42 p.m. I know because I checked my phone. It rolled up without a sound, glossy, tinted, the kind of car you see in movies, not graduation parties. The driver stepped out first, then the man in the suit. Tall, gray hair, confident stride. He walked through the yard like he belonged there, like he knew what he was about to say would shift the entire atmosphere. He stopped at our table, looked directly at Jordan, and said, "We're here for Dr. Jordan, from Harvard." That was the moment every insult turned to silence. The moment Karen's smirk dropped from her face like a broken mask. The moment Emily's boyfriend leaned back in his chair and whispered, "Wait, your daughter?" Jordan stood, calm, unrushed. She nodded at him. "Thank you. Just give me a moment." Then she turned to Karen, and with all the poise in the world, said, "I'm not a waitress, but I'd still tip you. Mike, drop." She walked away, toward the car, toward her future. The entire party froze. Karen didn't speak. Emily looked down. A few people clapped, softly, unsure if it was allowed. But the damage had been done. The narrative had changed. And Jordan, she never looked back. The car door shut with a soft click, and just like that, Jordan was gone. The air in the backyard shifted. Thinner, quieter, like the moment after lightning strikes. Music still played through the speakers, but no one was dancing. No one was laughing anymore. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, blinking like she couldn't process what had just happened. Beside her, Emily clutched a half-eaten cupcake, staring into nothing. From the buffet line, someone whispered, "Did that guy say Harvard?" A neighbor murmured, "Did he call her doctor?" Another voice followed, more hesitantly, "I thought she dropped out." The murmurs spread like wildfire, curious, confused, and slowly, quietly ashamed. Karen tried to recover. She spoke too loudly, waving a hand like she was swatting away a fly. She said, "I'm sure it's just some honorary thing. You know how these programs are, they like to diversify." But it was too late. The crowd wasn't listening anymore. They had already seen what they needed to see, heard what couldn't be unsaid. The waitress joke still lingered in the air, but now it tasted bitter. I sat in my seat, calm. For once, I didn't need to defend my daughter. She had done that herself, perfectly. We left the party early. There was no reason to stay. On the drive home, I thought Karen might call. She didn't, but Jordan did. She called from the back seat of that black car. Her voice came through the speaker with a lightness I hadn't heard in months, maybe years. She said, "I think I just broke physics and a few egos." I laughed. "You definitely broke the internet. People are going to be talking." Jordan replied softly, "They'll forget, but I won't." She paused, and then said something that stayed with me. "I wasn't trying to hurt her, Mom. I just didn't want to shrink anymore." That was it. That was the moment she became fully herself. She didn't rise out of spite. She rose because she refused to stay small to make other people comfortable. That's not revenge. That's freedom. The fallout didn't arrive with fanfare. It came gradually, awkwardly, across the following weeks. The first ripple was a message from Karen, a short one. She said, "Hey, I didn't realize Jordan was doing so well. Congratulations." "Really?" I replied simply, "Thanks." A few days later, she sent another. She said, "We should all get dinner sometime soon. Emily's feeling a little, overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. Of course. Turns out, when the spotlight shifts, it burns. Jordan never replied to Karen, but she did send a quiet message to Emily. She wrote, "You don't need to compete with anyone, least of all me. Be proud of what you've done." It was more grace than Emily probably deserved, but that's who Jordan is. Still, things began to shift. For years, Karen had been the family's voice of certainty. Her opinions shaped conversations. Her daughter was the standard. But now Jordan was the one they whispered about with admiration, not pity. "She's a genius, right?" someone said at brunch. I always knew there was something different about her. Another added. Someone else claimed they heard she was writing a paper that could change quantum theory. Funny how people love a comeback. They just hate watching it unfold. Karen stopped coming to family gatherings. She claimed she was busy with work. Maybe she was. Or maybe silence was easier than swallowing pride. Emily, though, began reaching out. In small ways. First a comment on one of Jordan's posts. Then a quiet like on an article about her work. Then, finally, a message. She wrote, "I didn't realize how smart you were. I'm sorry I let my mom talk about you that way." Jordan didn't reply for a week. She let the message breathe. Then she answered. She said, "I'm not looking for apologies. I'm just looking for something real." They weren't suddenly best friends, but the ice cracked, and that was a start. The most unexpected moment came a few months later. Jordan had just returned from presenting at a scientific symposium when I got a phone call from Karen's ex-husband. He and Karen had split years ago, long before this. He couldn't handle the control, the endless comparisons, the obsession with appearance over depth. His voice over the phone was calm, even grateful. He said, "I just wanted to thank you." I asked him, "For what?" He said, "For raising the kind of daughter who proves people like Karen wrong without ever raising her voice." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled. Not long after, Jordan's story started gaining attention beyond the family. No one focused on the insults or the backyard scene, but the world saw the brilliance, the arc, the mind. Headlines read, Harvard's youngest research fellow, from dropout to doctor. Journalists called her a prodigy, a trailblazer, a disruptor. Jordan called herself something simpler, a student of the unknown. In one interview, the host asked her what she'd say to anyone walking an unconventional path. Jordan answered, "Sometimes the traditional road won't take you where you're meant to go. So you build your own bridge, even if they laugh while you lay the first plank." The host asked if she had advice for young women in science. She replied, "Never let small minds define the size of your questions." I watched that segment alone in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I used to pack her lunches, where she used to sit in her pajamas, solving puzzles with cereal crumbs on the table. And I cried, not because of Harvard, not because of titles or recognition, but because she made it without their permission, without compromise, quietly, powerfully, her own way. Karen reached out again. This time, not with a message or a phone call. She sent a letter, handwritten. I found it in the mailbox one afternoon, addressed to me. It said, "I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was pushing Emily forward, but really I was standing on Jordan's shoulders to feel taller. I see that now. I'm sorry for making you feel like your daughter was less." I folded the letter gently and placed it in the drawer. I didn't respond, not out of resentment, but because sometimes silence is a complete sentence. In the months that followed, everything slowed down, not in a sad way, but in that calm, quiet aftermath that always follows a storm. Life didn't go back to normal. It simply found a new rhythm. Jordan had moved to Cambridge by then. Her apartment was a small walk up, not far from Harvard's campus. Her days were long, sometimes 12 hours buried in lab work, sometimes full weekends spent with equations, not people. And yet she called every Sunday. She never missed it. She would ask, "Did you eat? Are you sleeping enough?" She had always been the one I protected. But now, somehow, she had become the one looking out for me. Her room back home stayed untouched. Not out of grief, not even nostalgia. I kept it just the way she left it because it had built her, and because she had built herself inside it. Meanwhile, Karen was busy trying to rewrite her part in the story. She started posting articles about gifted students, tagging Jordan in success stories, commenting things like, "Proud of our girl," as if the years of backhanded insults had never happened. But people remembered. Not everyone, but enough. At a baby shower that fall, someone asked Karen if she had really once said Jordan would end up as a waitress. Karen smiled tightly and admitted, "I did, and I was wrong." She didn't offer excuses. No dramatic apology. Just a quiet admission, maybe the first honest one in years. Emily, on the other hand, began to change. Freed from the weight of comparison, she stopped trying to follow her mother's script. She switched majors, dropped the postgrad program Karen had pushed for. Instead, she applied for a media internship. She even started a podcast, one focused on redefining what success actually means. One day, she invited Jordan as a guest. The episode was titled, "From Dropout to Doctor: Why Success Has No Formula." Jordan declined gently, but encouraged her to continue. She said she was proud of her for asking bigger questions. That mattered more than being on the show, because Jordan's victories had never been about exposure. They were about integrity. She didn't need a spotlight to shine. She never had. By then, Jordan's academic work had gone international. Her research paper on gravitational symmetry was accepted into one of the top physics journals. She spoke at conferences in Geneva, Tokyo, and London. She published under her full name, not initials. No anonymity. She had nothing to hide now. Her peers began referring to her as the voice of a new era in theoretical physics. And still, she sent me silly pictures of cats in lab coats and asked if I was drinking enough water. She was changing the field, and still, she was mine. I visited her that winter. She gave me a full tour of her research space, introduced me to her colleagues, some of whom were double her age. One of them smiled at me and said, "She's brilliant," a little intimidating, but brilliant. Her apartment was small and full of books, floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with science journals, old novels, and messy binders filled with her own notes. And right above her desk, written in neat black marker, were the words, "Don't prove them wrong. Prove yourself right." That was Jordan in a sentence. Back home, people still asked about her. At the grocery store, at the bank, during casual sidewalk conversations. "How's your daughter doing at Harvard?" I would smile and answer, "She's doing exactly what she was meant to do." Not everyone believed in her in the beginning, but they did now. One afternoon, I found something buried in a drawer. It was one of Jordan's old notebooks, the corner curled, the ink slightly faded. Inside, wedged between 2 pages of math I didn't understand, was a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone. There was no date, just her handwriting, raw and unfiltered. It read, "Maybe the world won't clap when I figure it out. Maybe they'll keep laughing. But if even one girl like me is watching quietly and thinks, maybe I can too, then I've already won." I sat on the edge of her old bed and wept because she hadn't been working for applause. She had been working for the girl watching in the shadows, the one still wondering if it's okay to ask impossible questions. And she had given that girl permission, not with noise, not with anger, with proof. A few weeks later, Karen asked if she could apologize in person. Jordan said yes. They met in a quiet cafe near Harvard's campus. I didn't go in. I waited outside. They sat across from each other, and for 22 minutes, they talked. I don't know what was said. I didn't ask. When Jordan came back to the car, I asked her simply, "How was it?" She looked out the window for a moment before replying, "She meant it. That's enough." And that was the end of it. Sometimes closure isn't dramatic. It's just quiet acceptance. People ask me now what I'm most proud of. They expect me to say Harvard or doctorate or genius. But it's none of those things. I'm proud that when the world told my daughter to sit down, she stood taller. I'm proud that when they laughed, she listened anyway. And I'm proud that she never had to scream to be heard. She just kept walking. And in doing so, she left a trail wide enough for someone else to follow. One night, Jordan sent me a voice message. There was wind in the background. She sounded breathless, like she had just climbed something tall. She said, "I'm on the rooftop. I just needed to see the stars tonight. Even when it's cloudy, I can still name every one from memory." She paused for a beat, then added, "Thank you for not pulling me back when I wanted to leap. I never forgot." That was it. She never needed the world to believe in her. She only needed one voice saying, "Go. I see you." And that voice was mine. It wasn't a headline or a stage that made it feel real. It was a small moment, a Tuesday evening, rain tapping softly on the windows. I was cooking dinner, something simple, when I glanced at the bookshelf and saw it, one of Jordan's old astronomy journals. The cover had frayed at the edges. Inside were her earliest notes, hand-drawn constellations, curious questions, and messy thoughts written in pencil. She must have been 12 when she wrote most of it, maybe 13. Flipping through it, I found a page I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't labeled or dated, just a quiet message written near the bottom in small handwriting. It said, "Someday, someone will see what I see. Until then, I will keep building." I stood there, soup bubbling behind me, tears rising again, not from sadness, but from awe, because she had done exactly that. She kept building. When no one clapped, when no one looked, when most people, even family, told her it was pointless. She kept going. That kind of strength isn't loud. It's not glamorous, but it's what makes a life unshakable. Jordan came home for the holidays that year. She walked through the front door with the same quiet grace she always had, carrying a backpack, a scarf, and a box of ginger cookies. There were no announcements, no spotlights, just the two of us. Hot tea, laughter about nothing, the comfort of presence. We stayed up late that night, sitting on the couch in our pajamas. She told me about her research, her ideas, a new project she was excited about. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood the light in her eyes. And then, in the quiet that followed, she looked over at me and said softly, "Do you remember when Aunt Karen said I'd end up a waitress?" I nodded. She smiled, not bitter, just peaceful. Then she said, "I think that moment changed everything. Not because of what she said, but because I chose not to believe it. That was the difference. Not the insult, but the decision not to let it define her. She could have become angry. She could have fought for approval. But she didn't. She stayed in her lane. She followed the questions. She let her work speak before she ever opened her mouth. And in the end, that voice, steady, true, echoed louder than all the noise that tried to drown it out. Sometime around midnight, we ended up in the kitchen. She was rummaging through the cabinets like she used to as a teenager. She pulled out her favorite mug and made hot cocoa. As she stirred it slowly, she said, "I used to imagine a version of this night, coming home after everything, sitting here, knowing I made it." I asked her, "And does it feel like you thought it would?" She paused, then shook her head. "No," she said, "it feels better, because I didn't just make it. I became someone I never imagined I could be. That was the real story. Not a prodigy, not a Harvard success, but a girl who refused to make herself small. A girl who didn't need anyone to say yes in order to move forward. A girl who was once mocked at a family party, and who now stands quietly in rooms the world once told her were out of reach. She didn't burn bridges. She built her own. By the end of that week, she had to return to Cambridge. As she packed, I noticed she left something behind, a small envelope on her old nightstand. Inside, it was a folded sheet of paper. One sentence, written in her careful handwriting. "For the next girl who gets laughed at in the wrong room, I hope you know it never defined me." I placed it in the drawer, not to hide it, but to protect it, because someday maybe another girl in our family will read those words. And maybe she'll need them. Maybe she'll remember Jordan's name, not because of her degrees or her titles, but because she walked out of that backyard with her head high. And maybe that will be enough. Years from now, when people talk about her, they might forget the insults. They might forget the party, the black car, the man in the suit. But I'll remember all of it. I'll remember the way Jordan sat still when they laughed, the way she waited for her moment, the way she stood without ever raising her voice. And most of all, I'll remember the silence that followed when the truth entered the room, and no one had anything left to say. Because that silence, that was the sound of a girl finally being seen. And it was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard.